Hey, what's up, you guys? It's your boy 360 Stacks in this thing, baby, representing TKOG. This is a theory crafting session. Straight in the kitchen, bruh. Not leaving until it's done. This has to be done. This deck is so crazy, you guys. You already know how I feel. Like, this deck is just never solved. It hasn't been solved. There's never been a format where Branded was truly solved. There's just too much potential. There's just too much overlapping effects. There's too many just like interchangeable cards and just moving parts where this deck can just be played in like a billion different ways. It seems, not literally, but just dang, bro, there's so many variants, there's so many ways that you can incorporate just one little tech card into the deck, and it just gives you an edge in different matchups. It's so adaptable to formats. You have Foolish Burial on steroids for literally any light dark wing beast warrior. Like, I mean, this card can send a lot. And Foolish Burial's at 1 for a reason. And that alone, if that's not enough, in combination with Expulsion, Branded Fusion can summon a myriad of different things. It allows you to bridge into archetypes that you have no business playing, utilizing cards that don't naturally belong to you. So I think this deck is very powerful. It's a threat. It's a dominant force in whatever format that it's not being power crept by Shizu, for example. I think this deck is incredible. It really is well-rounded to me, and there's a lot that it can do, and it offers so much more than a lot of other decks. It's good at multiple things. It navigates extremely well through established boards. It has weaknesses like every deck, but Ash is not the end-all be-all, and when you know your deck has a weakness, you're supposed to build your deck to beat it, and that's just common sense. The first thing is just your engine. And so the main purpose of this theory crafting session is to find the perfect balance of non-engine that still works flexible, being that it can be used as an engine piece, but also is not a blank card when you're going second. Because this deck, the issue with this deck is the issue I think everybody has, is you have very little space for non-engines, so therefore you're not able to play a lot of going second cards like other decks. But if you make up for that by utilizing cards that can still be both engine and also going second cards at the same time, you can cut a lot of engine and just play lower ratios of the same cards without losing actual physical copies of the cards, while being able to have a lot more variety going second, playing into boards. And there's going to be some really good prime examples that I'm going to bring up. If you like this kind of content, consider subscribing to the channel. Leave a like if you like the video, and definitely click the notification bell when you do subscribe. And let your boy know how I'm doing, bros. Sign up for that Discord. Go ahead and join up. I said sign up. Go ahead and join up for that Discord if you guys want to be coached, especially on this deck. I'm kind of nice with this deck, I'm not going to lie. I can show you. Tier 2 or higher in Patreon will get you personal one-on-one time, baby. So, these are not actually here. They're here, but they're not. They're in limbo right now. All these weird one-ups up here are not the list. This is not a deck profile. It's not a list. This is me perfecting a list. And I have a list already, but my issue is I don't have enough going second cards. I do not think that 9 going second cards is enough. Not when there's stuff that you have to prevent from happening. There's a lot of things that you just can't allow to slide. So hand traps are really, really good, but also at the same time, there are certain going second cards that prevent a different point of interaction from occurring on your turn. So there's like, for example, there can be a card like Gamma, where you can let Cash play, and if you know the biggest problem on their field is a Rise Heart, the Rise Heart will be dealt with by Gamma immediately. And you can easily deal with Shangri-La after that in a myriad of different ways, right? So that's one example. 2, cards like Talents and Thrust. These cards, especially in the Branded / Despia matchup, or even the Cash matchup, even against Labyrinth, these cards are cards where it's okay for you to allow the board to be made, because they get you a card that deals with the threat immediately. That these cards trade better. But see, the thing with these cards, let's bring these cards up, right? That makes them similar in the function that I'm looking for. The functionality that I'm looking for in these cards is that I need them to support my engine going first, right? So I don't want it to be like, I draw Ash. What does that do for me? Nothing. Unless I'm going second, or, hey, it's an extra layer disruption on whatever board I'm ending on. But is it helping me? No, it's not. So I can play a bunch of cards like that. I can play evenly matched. I can just main deck a freaking buttload of going second cards that don't benefit my strategy or my engine. They're just pretty much insurance to make sure that I don't die when I lose a dice roll. Or I can play cards that can do exactly that while also reinforce the engine, being that you can use these cards to play through disruptions and also to give you coverage on your choke points. You know, you have cards like Imperm, Valor, and Ash. Really good at this against this deck. Ash can hit Brand Fusion, but Imperm and Valor can stop your access to either Brand Fusion or a card that will allow you to play around it. So Ash plus one of those is like really, really hard to play around. When you open Insane in this deck, obviously you can play through both, but can you do it consistently? No, you cannot, unfortunately. The way the deck has to be played now, you cannot just play all gas and get away with it. If we're talking before Bestials ever came out, if we're talking traditional branded Despia, we're playing Allures, we're playing the Patchwork engine, we're just going all gas, that deck is opening Insane all the time because you're seeing a majority of your deck, right? But the issue is there's literally no going second cards, it's all engine, and that's fine in certain formats, but this is not that format. It's not the format where all gas will benefit you because there are different cards that prevent interactions and prevent certain actions from even occurring. So it doesn't matter how many cards you draw from your deck. It doesn't matter how many good cards you can play. If you have no zones to activate spells and traps, you can't do anything. If you're getting locked by Expulsion, you can't do anything. If you're getting hit by a virus or a skill drain, you can't do anything, right? You know, and I can just bring up a myriad of different things. If you're staring at 4 or 5 negates, you can't really do anything. So how do you solve those problems while also not taking away? Because the deck has to play a lot of engine for a reason. This deck is more consistent with the more engine that you integrate in it, but it's a sacrifice. You can make your deck way more inconsistent and play a ton of going second cards, and then you yourself will find an irony in that, being that you're going to be losing 2 going second cards because you decide to play more. So now, even though your deck technically is better going second, going first, it's whack because if you can't play through 1 or 2 hand traps, why are you even playing the deck right now? And if your boards are super duper flimsy and your opponent just activating evenly or just resolving talent or Eclipse is just enough to be the nail in the coffin, then what are you going to do about it? So coverage is important, but also just keeping in mind that like your engine still has to be played, right? So you want coverage, but you also want reinforcement for your engine. So that's going to bring us to the first 2 cards, Talents and Thrust. These cards, like Nibiru, are cards that can define a format. And when I say that, these cards can really affect how your opponent structures their plays, how the pilot of the deck actually navigates. They will play as if you have these cards even when you don't, because it's respecting the card's existence. You play around it, or you can just be ballsy and say, you better have it. But these are the kind of cards where if you have it, more than likely, Sword Soul's going to lose, right? You have this, Shangri-La is the only threat remaining, because if you don't chain a Rise Heart and banish itself, I'm just going to take the Rise Heart and I'm going to banish your Shangri-La. What are you going to do now? And you're always going to play in the talents because a Rise Heart cannot, it's not even optional. It has to activate every single time it's attaching. So these cards are really, really insane against Cash. Very powerful even against Labyrinth, bro. Thrust into Evenly is crispy. Thrust into Duster is clean. Thrust into even Virus is really, really nasty. So these cards, while they're not as popular, there are certain strategies that benefit more from these than others, you know? So it's just something that I feel is duly noted, because not every single one of these going second cards are going to benefit every single strategy, but Despia there's something that these all can offer this deck, whereas not every deck can play these, but Despia can play virtually any going second cards. So what I like about Talents is that if I'm getting hand trapped early and I haven't resolved Fusion, I can look at my opponent's hand and take their Ash. So that means if they use any other form of interruption on me that wasn't Ash before I activated Fusion, I can now take the Ash from their hand, right? But that also means Sword Soul's just going to die. It means when I'm playing against Cash, a Rise Heart, which is one of the biggest deals of that inboard, is going to clear itself. It doesn't really matter if you only have your extra monster zone in one monster zone. It doesn't matter at all. I'll tell you why, brother. It doesn't matter because you only need your EMZ when you're playing this deck a majority of the time. Your main monster zones are more just for, oh, you have Aliber and you need to summon him. So like even if they banish a Rise Heart to play around the talents, you can still take their Shangri-La. And on a separate chain, yeah, Diablosis can activate. You know, that's cool. He'll banish a couple cards. But the Shangri-La is now yours. You know? It's a difference. Because that means the Shangri-La is not going to activate on a separate chain and lock your zones out. It's going to lock their zones out now because it's yours. So Talents is amazing. Thrust is amazing. And in this deck, it's really powerful. If your opponent's actually negating your activation of your cards, Thrust can just get you another copy. For example, of Deployment or Fusion. Going into your side deck, it's even more powerful. So these cards not only can help you to alleviate Ash, which is just a bruise, it turns into a scar, but also at the same time, going second, they're not really that bad at all. They're not insane, they're not broken because your opponent can play around them. But what makes them so good to me right now is that they're not being played around because they're not really present in a lot of main decks. And so, like Nibiru, when your opponent stops playing around it, the cards are insane. But when your opponent plays around them, it makes you not even want to play them because they're dead cards a lot of scenarios. Like over 50% of the time, they're just blank cards that don't do anything. However, when you're going second, 100,000%, there's not really any way your opponent can play around these if they want to try and stop you from playing. But when you're going first, it's so much easier to play around these and they're just dead draws. And similar to Nibiru, it's insane when your opponent doesn't respect it. But when they do respect it, it doesn't really give you the value that you seek from it. Because even when you're able to use it, you're using it against somebody who knows that you were going to use it. They're playing as if you had it. So that means they had a contingency already in case you did actually drop a nib on them. Next, we'll talk about cards like Gamma and Crossout, which are very similar to the Tactics family. But these cards are more predicated to preventing interactions from occurring. These are when that actually happens to you. That's when these cards are going to benefit you as a defensive card most of the time. But these are meant to be counterplay. They're not supposed to let a certain card be used against you. So Gamma protects you on Ash most of the time. Gamma's also kind of crazy against a Rise Heart, no cap. Gamma's also kind of nice against Shangri-La. It just depends if they really did that combo where they left it with no materials. It depends. But Gamma against the Rise Heart 100,000% is amazing because it also puts the last two zones that you haven't got locked out with Gamma and Driver there, which means they're not going to be able to go after your monster zones. They're going to start going after your spell and trap zones. And that's actually a big deal. It actually is because Gamma and Driver can be used as fusion materials, which means you can clear those zones and actually like summon monsters to them. So Gamma's nice against the Rise Heart. It's nice against Ash. It's good playing into boards. It's crazy against Sword Soul. But what I like about Gamma is it allows you to comfortably play Epsilon, which Epsilon bridges into other things similar to Crossout. Epsilon allows you to stop cards like Expulsion in the mirror match. It can hit D-Barrier. It can hit Skill Drain. It can hit Evenly. It can hit Viruses. It's really, really, really strong against Labyrinth. It's okay against Cash, but it's more so just for coverage. D-Barrier is the primary thing, so when you're able to play both Crossout and Gamma, it means you have 6 ways to stop D-Barrier post-sighting, which is a big deal, bro. That they have 3 D-Barriers and you have 6 counterplays for it, so Gamma it's warranted. Gamma has a place and there's valid reasons for playing both. Where I see Crossout as a lot more flexible, obviously, because it not only can hit Ash, but it can hit any of these cards. Except Super Poly, obviously. You can't chain it to Super Poly, but you can preemptively call it. And if your opponent has it, and you haven't put monsters on your field yet, now you don't have to worry about playing around it. So I like this card a lot. Offensively, it's crazy going into the Cash matchup, because Ash is really the only way they can stop their board from being broken. And so what I like about this, and this specifically too, is it also hits Eclipse, which is dope. It hits a lot of different cards. It hits D-Barrier post-sighting. You know, it can hit Expulsion in the mirror match. It does a lot. It even hits Branded Fusion, if you really want to be a crackhead. But what I like with this in tandem with Ash is there's certain interactions where your opponent will have like the perfect out, right? They'll have Ash for Fusion and Eclipse, right? So they can either Ash your Eclipse or Ash your Fusion, but they'll also have Eclipse if you're even able to play. So when you, let's say you're on Dragoon and you summon Dragoon and you negate their Arise Heart and destroy it, they can actually go Arise Heart 1 any response. and you chain link 2 Dragoon, and they can go chain link 3 Eclipse. Now your Dragoon's not outing their Shangri-La, and their Shangri-La is getting ready to clear the rest and just lock you out, right? But if you have, like, literally this combination is beautiful because this can be able to deal with the Ashe or Eclipse, whereas this can be able to deal with Eclipse. Either one of those can be a detriment. So if they have Eclipse, you know, the Ashe will protect your Dragoon and you can finish cleaning their board up. If you have Crossout, you can deal with Eclipse or Ashe, which is a lot more potent. So Crossout is actually a going second card because Branded Fusion resolving in the cash matchup means that their board's being broken. That also means that cards like Imperm are even less effective because if they didn't have Ashe and all they have is Imperm, it makes it so much more safe to be able to play with Lost. So I like this card a lot. It gives you so much more coverage, not just for hand traps, but for blowouts like Evenly, like Eclipse, the Tactics family. D-Barrier is a menace against this deck. It's really, really powerful. I actually like this card a lot. In my current list, I mean it. And then we go into cards that are almost similar, being that they are defensive cards that allow you to play through more, while also just being board breakers. So Eclipse is so popular that it makes me not even want to play to my main deck unless it's a Crossout target. I don't really respect this card the same way others do. I don't think it's bad. I don't think it's bad at all. I like that it has applications to be able to dodge Valor and Imperm, so you have that going, where playing into boards, you know, it can be ashed, but at the same time, it's a double-edged sword because there's good and bad things about it. The fact that this can be ashed means your opponent only has one Ashe. What are they going to use it on? Either one of these can break their board, so it doesn't really matter which one they use it on. I feel like a smart player would save it for Fusion because this is non-engine and it's less accessible. But if this card gets flipped, you have to think that's the entire cash board gone. So it doesn't really matter, you know, whether they Ashe Fusion or not, because the board's going to go. So this card acts like Crossout. It also acts like Crossout being able to dodge Imperm and Valor, even if you're going first. It also acts like a pseudo trap, but because it's so respected, people are even main decking Forbidden Lance, my brother. So I don't think that it's bad. I just think because it's so expected, it's so popular, it's mainstream, your opponent is going to play around this card a lot more than they will play around even these. Isn't that crazy that they would play around Eclipse more than they play around Thrust? Yes, it's facts. Super Poly, very similar, allowing you to dodge targeting effects on your Aliber. Even if you're not summoning Mud Dragon, into the cash board, a Rise Heart is actually a dark, bro. So if you're summoning, for example, Aliber and they flip an Imperm, you can actually chain Super Poly, fuse away the Aliber and that Rise Heart, miss the target on Imperm, Aliber resolves, you dealt with the Rise Heart. So now they don't have two ways to banish face down cards, so Shangri-La can only trigger one time. But you got to think about it this way. If they didn't activate a Rise Heart to banish a card face down, Diablosis is not going to trigger, nor was Shangri-La. So that means if you're Super Polying, like if the first action is Aliber and they decide to Imperm or Valor it and you chain Super Poly, they're not locking the rest of your zones because they have no other way to banish face down cards unless they have Birth, right? But see, Birth, let's go ahead and take you to Birth. Womp, 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 womp. Boom. Right there. Opponent activates a spell card or effect. Target 3 in your opponent's grave. Banish them. To my knowledge, Birth is on a separate chain. If it's chainable, it's even worse. But I believe Birth is on a separate chain. So even if they have Birth up, this is the thing, bro. You've already dealt with the Rise Heart. You put a monster in your main zone because you never use your EMZ. And you're also forcing them to use Birth early because they're going to want to try and lock your zones. So because of that, it's going to make Branded Fusion a lot safer because most of the time they'll be praying that they can save Birth for Fusion. But if Birth is their last opportunity to use Shangri-La on their leisure and not when you decide to play into it, most of the time they will probably just use the Birth and lock the rest of your zones and trigger Diablos. If they don't and they're just letting you like use Fusion, that means that they're at your mercy. So you can do anything to Shangri-La before you even activate Fusion. So their last opportunity to trigger Shangri-La at their leisure is now being they're just relinquishing that to you because they're being greedy and they want to get it on Fusion. What if you clear their board beforehand? You get what I'm saying? So for me, it's insane because let's say I actually summoned out What's my homeboy's name? Let's say I summoned out Proskinian. What if I brought back your Arise Heart and actually used your Arise Heart to banish your Shangri-La? How are you going to be able to, you know what I mean? How are you going to lock my zones? At this point, I don't even care if you banish whatever I'm sending off of Branded Fusion with Birth. I just care about bodies and pressure to kill you. It doesn't matter whether or not I can go into Mirror Jade or summon a Dragoon. All that matters is I'm putting bodies on the field and I'm going to kill you. Show me the nib, bro. So that's what I like about Super Poly. It's a one card out to the cash board. It's really good against Labyrinth. It also is really good in the mirror match, similar to Crossout and Gamma slash Epsilon. I mean, Crossout and Epsilon, being that if they activate Expulsion, right? I mean, if they're setting up Expulsion, the only way they can play around this card is if they end on exactly one monster. That's it. That's it. So they're ending on one monster. The odds are they're not. They're going through loops. They're going through extra steps to set up that Expulsion. Sometimes they're even ending on Homegirl because they're using her to send the Nightmare to set up Expulsion. That means because it's your turn and you're drawing, and in draw phase you get priority at the start of every single phase. Not just your main phase. At the start of every phase the turn player has priority. Main phase is just one of those phases where your opponent cannot commit any actions until you make the first move. But in your standby and your draw phase, you are allowed to activate the first card. Your opponent cannot take the first action away from you. So you can literally just activate Super Poly and the Expulsion is dead. If they're me and you know you're playing into Super Poly in your stacks, you're going to actually summon a card like Masquerade because it can bring itself back and make Expulsion live again. But not everybody's that nice, not everybody's that smart, not everybody has that kind of hindsight. And also, not everybody's able to do it. Your hand might not allow you. So Super Poly can even save you from being Expulsion locked. It breaks the cash board. It's actually really, really decent against Labyrinth. And it gives you coverage, dodging targeting effects. And going first, it's just one of those cards where you can get Book of Eclipse and they can still lose to Super Poly. And it's not just the fact that it dodges targeting effects. In the cash matchup, when you summon Mud Dragon by clearing their field, which you can either play two of this, you can play one. There's so many options in your extra deck that they're never going to deny you the ability to break their board, whether it's through Fusion or Super Poly. It doesn't freaking matter, bro. On summon, you can just declare Dark, and this is going to either force interaction or turn interactions off. So now cards like Imperm and Valor are useless. You didn't even have to hit the Arise Heart. Let's say you just didn't. Now I can't target Jack Squat, all the cards that matter. And that means it's almost like having branded loss when you think of it, because now all they have to stop you is Ash, and if you have a way to stop Ash, it doesn't matter. So it's almost like having lost up, because on summon you can do whatever you want and your opponent can't target your cards. So Super Poly is not just a board breaker, it has applications to prevent you from being hand trapped, and also against Labyrinth, pointing it out not just to clear their field, but to stop your cards from being targeted by Compulse, from being targeted by Terrors of the Underroot, and even Dogmatica Punishment. This is a big deal, because if they can't activate traps, they can't generate a lot of the advantage they want to, they can't trigger cards like Lady, and it's harder for them to get follow-up. And it also means they have blank cards. So it's so much easier to OTK Labyrinth when you summon Mud Dragon, because you're denying so much interaction from them that they have to have specific cards. This card even helps a little bit against D-Barrier. It's not the end-all be-all, but just being able to chain this to D-Barrier and still get value is a big deal, because you'll not only get that protection, you'll be able to not only be able to dodge a targeting effect, but you'll be able to preemptively get something out before D-Barrier resolves. Patchwork, I think, is the weakest, not because it's a bad card, but just simply because Patchwork is like, it's good, in the sense that, hey, if I have Albaz, I'm playing through Ash, right? I'm nice. I'm going to summon Guardian Chimera. See, Patchwork is one of those cards where you have to be able to play in the first place for it to be good, where these cards will make sure that you are able to play. They either prevent, deny, or they clear the problem or deal with the threat that's not letting you play. This does neither in a lot of instances. It's a nice card. It's a cool addition. But I think that if you want to play competitively, you have to weigh the pros and cons of this card. Does this have similar functions of the last 6 cards we just talked about? Absolutely not, bro. The best case scenario, you're playing through Ash with this card, which, again, it's not really worth it to me. It's another way to fuse, but you have a lot of ways to fuse, right? So it's not really worth it to me when there's so many better cards that can already solve that problem for you, while also being high impact blowouts in almost every matchup. Now this is my GUU. This is a card that I save for last on purpose because Small World is something that's been a lifesaver. So, Small World affects the composition of your main deck. And there's some weird math with this card. But basically, the way it works is you reveal something in your hand. Then you take something from your deck that matches the card you revealed by only one of those aforementioned statistics. You banish the first. Now the card that's in your deck is going to find something that matches it by only one. So let's just say, for example, I have an Aliber in my hand, like an extra Aliber. I can take this Aliber, and because he has 0 defense, I can take him and reveal Effect Veiler, right? Effect Veiler matches Aliber through only one thing, 0 defense. I can now banish that Aliber. I can use this Effect Veiler to grab myself a Kurikara, because Kurikara only matches Veiler through one thing. They are level 1s. Do you know what that means? Now, because Kashtira decided to lock, zones or whatever, and they decided to, let's say they decided to lock my spell and trap zones on res because Small World would trigger it. They're like, oh, you buffoon. Now I can just Kurikara their entire field. Their board has been broken by one card. But it's not just that. I can get Lava Golem. I can get Epsilon. I can get Gamma. I can get Trap Eater to out skill drain. I can get Dinko Sekka so that even in the mirror match and in the Labyrinth matchup, it's free real estate. But I can also just search my engine pieces. It means I can play less Lubellions. I can play less copies of certain cards that I'm playing more just to see, because this gives me 3 extra copies of virtually any monster in my deck. So it's not just a starter, it's also a going second card. It also just allows you to do more with less. Because would you rather, let's say, open Fusion and just pray they don't have Ash? Or let's say you do have Fusion and they have Ash, and you have one other play. Would you rather sacrifice those 2 cards and still not break the board, or just trade a neg 1 for a card that indefinitely breaks the board? The drawback to this is that if they lock all your spell and trap zones, you can't activate it. However, if you look at it, all of these cards are spells and traps. So if Cash opens a way to trigger Shangri-La, open multiple Shangri-Las and lock your back rows, then obviously the only other way that you're clearing their field is with your monsters. So that's going to be with cards like Nib, Lava Golem, and Kurikara. Kurikara, I think, is really good if you're going to be playing Small World for multiple reasons, not just for the Cash matchup, but also just being a bridge. You can use this to connect yourself to Lava Golem, or you can even use you can use this to connect yourself to Lava Golem, or you can use this to go into Lava Golem and use Lava Golem to connect yourself to Lubellion, because Lava Golem stats don't match Lubellion's, they only match through being level 8s, that's it. So there's really, really cool science with this card. I think it is great because it is more Aliber, it's more Mercuriers, it's more Cartesias, it's more Albazes, it's a Nib if you need it. I'm going first. I already have full combo. I just want an Ash Blossom now because this is the mirror match. You know what? I'm playing against Cash. They might really be nice and they might open Godly. I want a Nib now because they have to play into my board. And then the moment they put up enough pressure to OTK me, I'm going to Nib them. There's no way that they're going to be able to play around the Nib unless they put up lethal and can still keep going past that. And it also just makes your dead hand traps into actual engine pieces. So I think this is my favorite amongst all these for multiple reasons. It's just so insane, you guys. It can get you any of these cards. Any of them. It's really, really powerful. I personally like that. It also affects the ratios for your siding, because now instead of side decking 3 Trap Eaters, right? Because I don't like skill drain, I hate anti-spell, and I hate when they have negates to reinforce it. I don't like my opponent setting 5 and passing. I don't have to play 3 of any of these. I can just play 1 of each. The same for my main deck. I don't have to play multiples of certain cards. Now I have 4 Lubellions instead of 2 or 3. Now I have 6 Alibers. Now I have 4 Mercuriers. Now I have 7 Albazes. Really, I have 10. Do you understand what I'm saying? It makes life easier because this card is just anything you need it to be most of the time. So you don't really have to put so much as far as your ratios. So what this means is when you play Small World in your branded list, now you can play way more non-engine and you don't have to worry about sacrificing from your engine because you just got 3 more of anything you need. It's almost like Prosperity, but better. But better in my opinion, because it's a guaranteed way to play, it's a guaranteed way to out a board, and it's a guaranteed defense mechanism. This card being hit by Ash is non-existent because this is what's going to be hit by Ash. And it goes back again to the Book of Eclipse kind of scenario. If Cash has an Ash, they're going to Ash this, right? Or they're going to Ash this. And you also keep in mind that this card can be played at 3. You know, you can play Lava Golem. Contrary to what people say, this deck does not need its normal summon. We used to play Brave Branded back in the day. We have deployments and openings. We have 6 emergency teleports. You have hard draw infusions. You have combinations with like the Bestials in tandem with your Albion that just can get you fusion without even having a normal summon. Lava Golem, if you play Small World, Lava Golem is another really cool bridge so that you can see Lubellion more consistently because he only matches through being a level 8. And it also allows you to bridge into, for example, Ad Libitum without sacrificing a Lubellion either. So if you're playing Small World, I would probably play like 2 to 3 Kortikaras and 1 to 2 Lava Golems. You could even just go 1 and 1 of each, and that's totally fine. I like playing multiple because in the scenario where Cash decides to go for my spell and trap zone, I can just hard summon Kortikara to my monster zone, and that's their bad. Because this card, like Thrust and Talent and Nib, can be played around, but because it's not respected, it's not feared, it's not popular, it's not in anybody's list, not a soul's playing this right now, competitively at least, it's not being played around, which actually makes it insane because if I played Cash 13 rounds straight and they never played around this card, I would out their board every single time I drew this, right? Because this is why. They're going to play around it and go for my monster zones. Now I can activate, what? Branded Fusion, Small World, Crossout, Thrust, Talent. Do you understand what I'm saying? It puts them in the ironic kind of dilemma where it doesn't really matter which of the 5 zones they lock out. You can always out their board utilizing either one of them. And it makes them fear certain things more than others. So because like your spells are more fruitful and abundant, it will make them go after your spell trap zone more often than not, which makes this card so much more impactful because you can even just take their Arise Heart during the end phase and use it against them just to clear their birth. Like, to be able to take a Rise Heart and get materials under it and banish their birth, taking their follow-up completely, makes this card insane. Not only that, the fact that it is a level 1, right, which bridges into Valor, which bridges into cards like Tragedy. It's a fairy, which is one of the reasons why I could bridge into the Despias. But it also is a fire, which is how I can bridge to Ash and Lava Golem. But it's also 15 attack and defense. So that is just like, for me, that's insane, bro. Like, that's so freaking insane. Like, I think this card is gnarly. I really like it a lot. So Small World is the last of the non-engine that can benefit your engine. So you guys let me know what you think. There's so much, right? There's so much detail and there's just so much overlapping things when talking about just these 8 cards. 30 minutes talking about 8 cards, right? That's crazy. Branded Loss is a really, really nice tech card. The niche where it comes up is literally you're playing against Cash, you fusion, they activate Imperm. Because you don't activate Loss because you know they're going to Rise Heart it, right? So you're playing against them. They Imperm your fusion, and now you have access to Loss. You activate Loss, and you clear the Shangri-La, right? So you're just going to bounce your guy, you're going to clear your Shangri-La, and then you're just going to pop out a Mirror Jade or whatever you want during the end phase. But the fact of the matter is, your engine just outed Shangri-La while also allowing you to trade with an Imperm and still deal with the most precedent threat, like the card that bothers you the most, right? So it's cool. Outside of that niche, it's kind of insane in the mirror match. It really, like, high-key it is, even though they can summon their own fusion, it's just so ridiculous. There is something else, too, that's really niche. It's good in the mirror. It's good in certain matchups too, but also with the proper setup, it can reverse the expulsion. It can reverse the expulsion lock. So I like that a lot. I really do. I think it's just crazy. Like, it really is. I think this card is so gas. I just wish that it didn't have the specific activation requirement. You know what I mean? But at the same time, it's one of those cards where it's an easy side in or side out for the mirror because it's really insane in the mirror. It really is. It gives you so much mileage. And so now that all of the tech cards for the main have been talked about, right? Banishment is okay, you know? If it's not the mirror, I don't see this card being that impactful. Worst case scenario though, it is kind of like your expulsion backup. If your opponent super polys you and you have the expulsion lock, you can banishment back your fusion and then expulsion it away. Beast, I think, dominates in the Labyrinth matchup and against Kashtira, but I don't like playing so many traps right now. I really don't. So it's like Beast or Expulsion or Banishment. In the format we're in now, you can't afford to draw blank cards going second. So out of the three of these, Expulsion has the most applications to be degenerate, and also just to be able to give you coverage. I mean, you can bring so many things back, whether it's for follow-up, whether you're doing Cartesia combos, whether you're bringing Mercurier back, whether you're just putting a monster on the cashier player's field, just to force them to play awkwardly. Simorgh is a great target for multiple reasons. It can be dumped via Dusk, it can be dumped via Fusion, and it can also not only be a dark target, but it's a winged beast, so you can summon out this bad boy right here. And this card I think is better than Jinzo because it's not just good against Labyrinth, it's good against like a lot of decks. You'd be surprised how many decks cannot do anything when they can't set. It's crazy, bro. Like, this card is freaking ridiculous. And so, I'm going to bring you right here, where it says your opponent cannot set cards. Did you know when you put up a card face down that it's being set? So, to my knowledge, this card also means you can't even book of Eclipse cards, because setting them face down still counts as setting. Technically, if I'm wrong, go ahead and correct me. I'm not saying that I'm right. But to my knowledge, setting a card face down, whether you're flipping it face down through an effect or just setting it from your hand, is still setting a card. Because face down cards, that's the only way you can play a card face down, is to set it. So Simorgh kind of, is nice in that regard. This is the best Expulsion target if you just want to deny actions. Barrier and Evenly are both Crossout and Thrust targets, which is just, again, more reason to want to play these cards. And these are phenomenal small world targets. This is a really, really cool package. It's another way to be able to deal with the cash board while also giving you coverage. It's going to be super dope in time too, obviously. Shifter is incredible. I see value in this card, even though this is like a cash tier dominant format. This card in the mirror match is kind of nice. Because in the mirror match, it's just all about pressure and killing your opponent. You can grind with each other for 40 minutes and just say, hey, who has Masquerade and who doesn't? But at the end of the day, if they're not being able to get their main phase 3 and their end phase, it's so much easier to kill them. I really don't care too much for the lock, because believe it or not, with the way this deck's able to play, you can set up ways to interact on your opponent's turn even if you're under the Nightmare lock. Virus. This card, I see it as like a thrust and a cross-out target. I like it also. I just think this card's really, really nice, especially against that Labyrinth deck. And this is just, again, just like Crossout's another way to hit Barrier. It can hit other key cards too, and these cards we already talked about. So yeah, that's all I have for today. God bless you guys. Make good choices. Don't hurt your brain cells. Stay tuned for future content. You guys will see lists messing around with these. But I'm going to tell you right now, I've already tested these, and I think that the best non-engine cards right now for me are Small World, Super Poly, and Crossout with 2 thrusts and 1 talent. I have really weird ratios, but I like it. So like if you're able to find a way to integrate 2 thrusts, 1 talent, that's 3. Crossout, that's 3, that's 6. Super Poly, that's 9. And Small World, that's 12 non-engines. And the Small World is going to help you a lot, especially with the Crossout, because your buttload of hand traps comes down to smaller ratios of certain cards, because those hand traps are going to be not only Crossout bridges but also Small World bridges. You might have to use an Ash to get to a certain card, right? So then you still want to have one in your deck for Crossout. So ultimately it makes it to where you're not playing hand traps to hand trap your opponent, you're playing hand traps to break boards and to prevent cards from being able to stop you from playing. So these, in my opinion, are the upper echelon. If you can craft a list that can play all of these like how my list is, you will see the difference in results, whereas playing like, just Eclipse and then just a bunch of hand traps. Because most branded lists are literally just playing like 3 Eclipse, 3 Nibs, 3 Ash, and they're playing either like Crossout on the main or side, and they're playing like the Neospatian package via Fusion deployment, which I don't think is bad, but also at the same time, I would rather have a talent in my hand than a Neospatian Aqua Dolphin. Believe it or not, they have similar purposes, because if my opponent has a hand trap, I'm going to get hand knowledge regardless, but this card does so much more, and also Dolphin is like good if your hand is good, but it's bad when you can't really play, and it doesn't really have that like talent, like where you are going to get hand trapped with this deck. If your opponent has hand traps, they're going to use them, even if they Ash and you have talents, to be able to just look at their hand and take their starter, because you can still play past Ash a lot of the times. This is why like the 3 Small World with the 3 deployments and the 3 Albaz is so insane to me because I have 9 Albats and I have 8 Cartesias. So it ups the consistency so much that I don't mind them ashing fusion. I'd rather let them think that they're doing something that they're really not, and still just set up my expulsion lock anyways, just by literally going skadoosh, dump, bring it back. And this is where your kit is so vital, especially when you're playing Lost, because it allows you to get a second Aliber and extend past hand traps. So now you can set up expulsion locks without even resolving fusion, because Kit can get expulsion and your Dusk can dump the target. And it also is a target to tribute for expulsion and has an effect in Grave, which is amazing. So God bless you, make good choices, don't hurt your brain cells, stay tuned for future content. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Peace.